unleashing female power.
Being a disruptor.
I'm always constantly telling the truth.
I love
art. That's all her life.
She's alive and female.
Being a woman, what it meant.
Prove him wrong.
Girls run the world.
We're rocking the place.
Welcome to the Art Pod. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'll be your guide through this Pandora's box. Strap yourselves in for a journey through the art world where we bring you candid conversations, untold stories, uncover industry secrets, and celebrate the women who are shaping its future. Because in the Art Pod, the spotlight is always on the girls. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Art Pod. My guest today is Hannah Gompertz. Welcome.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you for being here. And Hannah is actually the Director of Communications and Marketing at DIA, our foundation, a unique institution focused on minimalism and land art with 12 sites and locations where she oversees press, marketing, social media, and digital content. She was previously a senior account manager at Sutton, an international cultural communications agency where she worked in both London and New York across a broad range of clients, including Art Basel, Chisenhall Gallery, Hauser & Wirth, and the Guggenheim Bilbao. Hannah graduated from University College London with a BA in History of Art with Material Studies. All right, so maybe we could start by talking a little bit about what you do at DIA and kind of like what your day-to-day looks like.
Yeah, so DIA is a really unique place. So I think my job probably looks like a lot different to what it would be at like the MoMA or the Brooklyn Museum. We have DIA Beacon, which I think most people would be most familiar with, but we're actually a lot more than that. We have 12 sites and locations. We have 3 rotating exhibition spaces, DIA Beacon, DIA Chelsea, DIA Bridgehampton, and then a number of permanent artist sites, predominantly in the US, but we also have a site in Germany as well. A lot of those are land art sites. We're very focused on land art, minimalism, post-minimalism, and conceptual art. So it's a slightly different way of working because we're working across a number of different locations. I'm mainly based in the city, but I go up to Beacon a lot. I'm out in Bridgehampton every now and again, and then I'm out also at our land art sites. So I go out to Spiral Jetty, Sun Tunnels, Nancy Holt's amazing piece in the desert in Utah. And then occasionally out to New Mexico, where we have Walter de Maria's Lightning Field. I oversee press, advertising, social media, other marketing activities, and then also digital content, which is somewhere where we've really been expanding our work. DIA was quite almost insular for a long time. We didn't produce a lot of digital content, certainly not a lot of video content. And I think that when the pandemic happened, we realized that this was an area that had really been neglected. And we were kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by not embracing that.
Yeah, I think every museum during the pandemic
I think
and
everyone
gallery,
had that epiphany.
they're like, yes, exhibitions online.
But, DIA, a lot of our sites, we don't allow any photography. Any of our like Walter de Maria sites, there's no photography, there's no video. Most of them don't have signal. And even DIA Beacon, I think it was maybe 10 years ago, we allowed photography for the first time, which is kind of funny because like now DIA Beacon is this like, people go there to take photos. It's like a kind of a, people go and take Instagram shots there. So we've really started investing in that area a lot more. So we're now producing video content. We're being more experimental in how we use our different platforms. That's been a big area of growth for us. But we're a really small team. We're 3 people. And
so it's you who's the head lead person, and then who are the other 2 people?
I have a digital content manager and a communications coordinator.
Okay.
They're both incredible. And we wear a lot of hats.
I can imagine.
It's very collaborative. It's kind of fun because we get to work across a lot of things. At the same time, you always want more. But it's kind of a fun way of working. It's a little scrappy. But I think, when you have the right people in your team, you can get so much done.
Oh, 100%. And it's interesting because, honestly, what I've learned, speaking to everybody here is really every single team on like museums and galleries is so small, especially for like communications and all these things. And it's just amazing how so few people can get so much done.
Yeah.
Like really warriors. But I mean, it's so much because you guys have so much content. I mean, like the 12 sites, you work with living artists, you work with estates.
There's just so much potential there. And so much like amazing storytelling that can be done. And I think, you know, something that we've really been trying to work on at DIA is like bring that to a much wider audience and also educate people with not just Dear Beacon. There are like all of these other projects that we've, you know, a lot of them we commissioned in the 70s and we've looked after them ever since. I mean, the Earth Room is a great example of one of those kind of places I think people stumble across, and it's this secret gem in the city. And for people who aren't familiar with the work, it's an apartment on the second floor in Soho that is completely filled with dirt. And it's been there for almost 50 years. It was actually originally not supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be up for like a traditional gallery show run. And Heiner Friedrich, who's one of our founders, it was actually his gallery space. And he came in and saw the work and said, no, this has to stay forever. And, you know, transferred ownership over to DIA, the nonprofit. And it's been there ever since. And
how do you maintain these spaces?
We have a caretaker for that work. And actually Bill Dilworth, who has been the caretaker for 30-something years, is just retiring. But him and his wife, Patty, he looked after the Earth Room. She looked after the Broken Kilometer, which is the sort of, you know, the other Walter Weir work that's around the corner. And they would meet for lunch every day. And
that's so sweet.
There are so many of these stories that are part of DIA. Yeah, you know, something like that people, you only go if you know, you know, and we kind of, that's fine to some extent, but I think that if you know attitude like only goes so far, and actually we want people to know about these things and come and see them. All of our sites in New York City are free. And it's like, you know, we want to get bodies through the door and have them like experience these pieces.
Yeah, because I know then the other sites like Spiral Jetty and Walter de Maria, those are, you have to like do an appointment, right?
For the lightning fields, you book it's an overnight stay. Yeah. So there's a cabin, and there are six spots in the cabin. At the top of the year, you can, you know, it's in February, you can book your position there. It's now very hard because it's so popular. Everyone times their email to come in at like midnight on the dot on the booking day. So we just go through and work out like who's coming first. Yeah. But you go and spend, you know, 18 hours out there. For Spiral Jetty and, you know, other landmark sites, you can just go. There's no ticketing. You can just go and spend as much time as you want.
And who takes care of those sites?
So, you know, the lightning field is more complex. We have a caretaker out there, and then we have some other people who work with him to maintain the work. Actually, Robert Weathers was the caretaker for almost 50 years. He actually helped build it.
All these people have been with DIA for like so long.
Oh, to get a shout out at the staff party, you've got to be there for like 20 years minimum. But yeah, Robert is also retiring this year, but his daughter and son-in-law are taking over the reins.
Great.
So, yeah, there's like a real sort of like legacy of people who have been involved really long term in these pieces. And, you know, that's sort of emblematic of how DIA works with artists. We, you know, when we start working with artists, it's long term, it's in depth. We're not just buying a painting. We buy a body of work, or we commission like a large scale work that can fill a space rather than piecemeal group exhibition. And that really signals the beginning of a, you know, we will work with that artist forever, for as long as they'll have us. Yeah. And that whether that's exhibitions or public programs or publications, it's really like a very in-depth of working with artists, which I think is quite unique to DIA.
Yeah. And you guys really protect their legacy, which is great, because once you're in it, you're in it.
And it's interesting from a like communication standpoint working in that way because, you know, I used to work in an agency and sometimes you're like, I will take anything and everything and I will like make it happen. And at Dear, it's like, this actually the artist always comes first. So I'm not just trying to get as much press as possible. It's like a really considered conversation also with the curator, with the artist, like what do they want? What are they comfortable with? How do they want to be presented? And I think, you know, that's a way that everyone aims to work, but it's not always possible, especially in an agency setting when there are all of these pressures. And at Dear, there's this kind of greater understanding, whether that's with the curator or the director. We're not looking for like quantity, it's quality.
Yeah. And also, I mean, not recently, but in the last few decades, I mean, Dia started as a very white male centric kind of space, and I've expanded to show all these like different women artists and these, you know, breakthrough artists, which is amazing.
Yeah. It's, you know, it has our origins are very much in like a very kind of like macho land artist, you know, those kind of like minimal folk like Judd, etc., etc. I think, you know, that's especially with Jessica Morgan, who's our current director, who came in almost like 9 years ago, I think now. Her goal really was to change that narrative. We're very focused on the 60s, 70s, and Dia had kind of created the art history around that period of time.
100%.
And it was like dramatically incomplete. So I think, you know, what she's been working in a really thoughtful way on with our curatorial team is expanding that narrative to include these artists who were very much present. You know, you look at artists like Dorothea Rockburn, like Meg Webster, who just has an exhibition that opened at Dear Beacon. They were, you know, they had exhibitions at MoMA. They, you know, they were big. And the difference is that they didn't have commercial support. So, you know, it's been a really like gratifying time to work there. They're doing the work in a very measured, thoughtful way rather than knee-jerk. Yeah. Which I think a lot of institutions can fall into that trap.
Of course, whatever's trendy.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, I think this like relates to our, you know, bigger approach to working with these artists. The work that we have on view of Meg Webster's right now, I mean, not only is it the biggest presentation of her work ever to date, it also, we've acquired a number of those works. We're also making a publication. It's the first publication about her work that's ever been
wild.
Produced. This is an artist who is massively important, and it's wild that has never happened. So it's about doing more than putting on an exhibition. It's like, how do you support this artist long term? How do you, you know, put them back in the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the show, I was blown away because one, I was like, who's Meg Webster and why don't I know about her? Because she's been producing work for so long. Yeah. So I was just like, you know, she's fantastic, and she carries on this legacy of land art and minimalism in her work and working with, you know, natural materials and everything like that. But it was just so interesting that, you know, this would be like the first publication, for example, that you're really producing on her work.
No, it's you know, it's really important work. And I think, I forget the exact statistic, but we were part of one of the studies that Charlotte Burns and Julia Halprin did a couple of years ago about representation of female artists within museum collections. And when we put our stats together for her, we were like, oh, wow, actually, over the last 5 years, I think it was, our acquisitions were more than 70% female artists.
I love to hear that.
Which is, you know, that's what really should be happening when you have an institutional collection that is so drastically skewed. And I think, you know, a lot of people are afraid to talk about it and put their money where their mouth is. But, you know, the work has been happening at Dear. So that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, you know, I love to hear that because, like you said, everything that you do kind of makes sense. It's not just trendy. And like you said, I really would love for more museums to put their their money where their mouth is, because everyone's always like, yes, we need more representation and diversity in women artists. But at the end of the day, you look at these collections and they're either going so slowly by acquiring these works, or they're just barely changing at all.
Yeah. And then I think, you know, when it comes down to what I do around that work, I'm very averse to, you know, placing some institutional story that's like, look at all these incredible things we've done.
Yeah.
I kind of think like the work tells the story.
Right.
And to place like a self-serving piece of press that is tooting your own horn, like, is not good for anyone.
100%. It should, for any museum and any collection, it should honestly be about the artist first. I mean, that's what these institutions are there for, is really to showcase artists and their work, not themselves. And it's like, oh, look at what we're doing. No, but yeah, I also saw the show at Dia Chelsea. Mm-hmm. Oh my God.
The Delcy Morelos exhibition.
Yes.
So this is, I think, another part of our work that people are less familiar with. So I think they would think of work from the 60s and 70s presented up in Dia Beacon. Our space in Dia Chelsea is, for the most part, we do contemporary commissions there. And it's generally artists who are working within, you know, the legacy of the artists that, you know, we've traditionally worked with. So Delcy Morelos, who's an amazing example of this, is this incredible Colombian artist who works with earth primarily. She has created these two very large-scale installations at Dia Chelsea that one of which is very, very low-profile, sort of like scented piece. It's very dark in there, and it sort of reveals itself to you. And then in the second gallery space, there's this like monumental earth sculpture that you can walk inside. And that is also scented as well. She's a really phenomenal artist who, again, has like not had the recognition that she should have had. Yeah. But the work is so in tandem with the interests of Dia. And I mean, this piece is incredible. We acquired one of them. And
can you tell us which?
It's the first piece, okay. The low profile, like beautiful piece, which actually has recycled a bunch of materials that we used in other Dia installations over the years, and then coated in earth. So it has these like very interesting tie-ins to Dia, just, you know, with a material history, but also thinking about like minimalism in the forms itself. You know, a lot of the artists we show there don't even have gallery representation yet. And actually, when they show at Dia, it's very interesting. They tend to then get picked up by very major galleries, because I think Dia still has this reputation as tastemakers and
100%.
as experimental.
Yeah. And, you know, I think, especially with the art that Dia shows, I think it could be intimidating to galleries, because obviously galleries are like, you know, money first, let's just be honest. And it's like, how do I sell this giant piece of, I don't know, wax or earth or whatever it may be? And, you know, like even back in the day when land art still first started becoming like popular, these artists would make these like tinier pieces, or they would photograph them or make a video work, and that would kind of be the documentation that would then be sold in galleries. So I think, you know, galleries might be just a touch intimidated by these artists, but their work is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we were supporting these experimental artists in the 70s, and we're doing it still now.
Yeah.
And that contemporary work is really important to what Dia is. And, you know, we also want to work with living artists and with artists who are like coming up and younger, and what is their take on this legacy. An artist who's really interesting in regards to that is Cameron Rowland, whose work is on long-term loan to Dia. It's one of our sites now, Depreciation, which is inherently like a critique of land ownership. So coming at this idea of like land or land art from a completely different lens. And I think, that's also part of what's very important about the work that Dia is doing now in acknowledging that, a work like Spiral Jetty might not be made today because there are a lot of very valid critiques, and we need to complicate that narrative also.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, as you mentioned, a lot of the spaces are rotating, but then obviously you have the sites that never change and they're kind of there, and you're taking care of them. And then there's like Dia Bridgehampton, where you have permanently, right, the Dan Flavin installation, and then the rotation of the show on the bottom.
So we're working on a lot of different timelines for all of these places. But, overall we open probably around 9 exhibitions a year. And then, in terms of our, even our land art sites where you would think, nothing ever changes, and what would you even be like pitching around that? Yeah. It's actually really not the case. Somewhere like Spiral Jetty has actually become this symbol for the real, like, I mean, it's sort of crisis level drought that's been happening in Utah for the last more than 10 years. The lake used to cover the entire sculpture. You couldn't see it at all. When Dia was gifted it by Nancy Holt, who was Smithson's widow, it was completely submerged. It was sort of like this Loch Ness monster. Is it even there? And it emerged. It was covered in like crystals of salt in this bright pink water. It's a very unique ecosystem out of the Great Salt Lake. And then ever since, that water has receded and receded and receded. It's now, I think, more than a mile away from the jetty. So it's really become this like emblem for a terrifying climate crisis, which is happening there.
Yeah.
And, it's sort of interesting because then my work starts intersecting with scientists, with, political campaigners, with all sorts of people that you wouldn't expect to be having conversations with.
Decades later, it's still very pertinent.
And, you never want to overstep. I'm not a science expert, no one at Dia is. So, really finding ways to, say, like, how can we help? How can we use this artwork to support your cause? While not stepping on your toes, not pretending to be anything that we aren't. And, also not compromising the artwork. So it's a interesting other side to what I do as well.
Interesting. So now my question for you is, with all of this stuff going on, how do you then start thinking in terms of communications and like storytelling, like what takes precedent over what, like how do you build these strategies so that everything is equal, but then you still showcase, what's happening in the moment?
We try and build in that messaging about like what is Dia, because I think that's really like our biggest challenge is trying to explain it, because it's complicated. There's not really an elevator pitch about what Dia is necessarily. And I think nor necessarily do people care about getting the long version. So it's about working out like, how do you communicate this in a really succinct way that still like incorporates all of these core elements as to what Dia is, because Dia is different. We're not like any other institution, and therefore it's it's harder for people to get that full understanding. We I think have certainly made some strides in increasing that understanding. I think really like the next step for us is thinking really like holistically about like, what does this like general education campaign look like beyond just press? We've traditionally not done a ton of advertising. And Dia's always kind of been this like insider place where, it's a lot of like art world insiders. And we really want to like go beyond that at this point. And how do we make sure we're, getting the tourists who are coming into town? We should be on their radar. There are all of these amazing things that they can do that are all related to Dia. So there's a little bit of watch this space there, I think, because we're working out what exactly that looks like in a way that still feels intrinsically Dia. But, there's work to be done, but I think it's very exciting. And I'm looking forward to broadening a little bit like what it looks like in terms of our like marketing and content strategies.
Yeah. And it's also interesting because when Dia first opened in Beacon, Beacon was just like, up and coming, the town.
Yeah.
And now it's like,
It completely changed.
yeah, they call it
Beacon.
the second Brooklyn, honestly. So, and I can vouch for that because every time I go, I feel like there's like a new store or pop up or something happening.
Yeah, it completely changed that town. Deer Beacon is in an old Nabisco box factory that had been derelict for some years, and that had really been the main employer. So it had been shut down. There was, not a ton going on, I think. And Deer has really like regenerated that area, which is, it's exciting. It's not without issues. We make sure to really like try and be a part of our local community, and make them, we have free admission for Beacon residents and also for Newburgh residents, which is the town across the river. And, we try and make sure there's something new for everyone there. We put on shows for such long-term view. That's like, what else can we do for our community? Whether that's like, putting on more educational programming, working more with local schools. One really exciting project that we just announced is we have a whole swathe of land out back that we are landscaping. So that is going to be open to the public, going to open next year probably. That will be, you can come in there via the museum, but you can also just go there. So it will also be like local parkland for our community.
Are you guys thinking of doing like any installations outdoors?
It's possible. It sort of opens up that possibility. I know there are projects that are somewhat in the works. It's not really contingent on that. We really want the landscape to kind of speak for itself as well. It's mainly meadowland, so it's a lot of native meadowland species. So we're hoping it's going to be really like wonderful thing for, ecology wise as well.
Yeah. I mean, I work at Magazine and we're neighbors, obviously upstate.
The donkeys.
Yes, the donkeys. No, but I mean, that was one of the big things that we were also thinking about in terms of landscaping, because we obviously landscaped it, but everything is native to the land. So the flora and fauna just stayed. We just obviously, redirected it and put it in different places, but it's all, from the area as well. And we try to be very, very conscious of that when we were doing our landscaping as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And the landscape is very important in Deer Beacon. So the museum, when we renovated, the design of the interior, but also the exterior landscape at the front was all designed by Robert Irwin. So, who's an artist who's very important to Deer. So I think, bringing in another landscape architect, Sarah Zodi, who's been incredible, she, really wanted to acknowledge that relationship with the front landscape, but, she has a very different approach, and she was really thinking about like indigenous movements through the land. And, again, the landscape itself, to her, like the landscape is not her artwork.
Right.
It's, a very different approach. And that's really, I think there's such a complement between those two designs.
Nice. So let's backtrack a little bit to the very beginning before you got to Dia. And let's talk about your studies at university in London. Walk me through it. Tell me about it. How was it? Did you love it?
So I did a very weird degree. It was, it's a bit of a mouthful, but history of art with material studies at UCL. Really kind of a one-of-a-kind degree. So it pairs history of art, or standard lectures, and then also like a very practical / like scientific like half of the degree, which was around like conservation and restoration of paintings. But that involved anything from like pure chemistry modules to working in a lab, making pigments, grinding up beetles, boiling them up.
Amazing.
Making my own like pigments and paints. And then, studio work, recreating paintings or working directly with, I worked on 17th century paintings, cleaning them. That's
so amazing.
Really, really fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of a different kind of degree that, sort of leads in theory into a conservation or restoration professional tract. I will say, going in that direction, it's something like training to be an architect in terms of your timeline. So it's probably about 7 years of training that you would do.
That's incredible. I never even knew that.
You would go and do a master's, you go do apprenticeships, and then the job pool in that market is painfully small.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I graduated. I decided on balance I didn't want to go down that route, and somehow ended up doing a art PR internship and really enjoyed it.
So what was your first internship out of school?
It was at Pelham Communications.
Okay.
Well, actually, I guess my first internship would have been part of my degree. We had a module which was, and I think this was actually, I wish more places did this, but was a work placement for 6 months.
That's honestly very critical.
So I would work 2 days a week at Whitechapel Gallery in London, which is an incredible contemporary art institution, in their curatorial department.
How did you like curating? Well, or working in the department, I should say.
I liked it. I think, again, that was never an ambition of mine, really, to go into that. Originally, I thought I would be an artist. But
Do you do any art now?
not really, no.
Okay.
I don't have time.
Fair.
But yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed it. I was working primarily there on a publication, which I found really interesting. And, then I did my first internship, which was at Pelham Communications. And I enjoyed that. And
Did you work on, like, when you were at Pelham Communications, did you work in the art sector, or was it just like
they
an
were just
overall?
arts. Yeah, it was just predominantly contemporary arts.
Okay.
They covered. So very sort of, these agencies are very specialist in the art space. So, yeah, and then I think, 3 or 4 months into an internship there, I got my first job at Sutton, which again is a very...
So how did you go from an internship to then Sutton? Did you just apply? Did you see like a...
I saw a job posting and just applied.
Okay.
Yeah. Then I spent 5 years at Sutton.
So tell us a little bit about how it was working at Sutton in London versus New York. What kind of did you do, or the accounts that you worked on?
So I started working on like the most junior rung at Sutton. I was a junior account executive. It was hard work. It was long hours. Also didn't pay very well.
Of course, agencies.
So I had a second job.
Yeah. So you had 2 jobs.
You have to make money on the side.
100%, yeah.
And this, one of the eternal problems with the art world.
Yes. Yes.
And listen, I always feel very lucky because I'm from London, and I think, I had a bit of a safety net in that, like, my parents still lived there. So if I couldn't make my rent, I could go and stay at home. But I think if you don't have that, it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and you're honestly not my first guest who mentioned the same thing. Like, it's the sad fact is, like, any entry-level jobs in the art world, you really either need like a safety net, or you need to be prepared to work a couple of jobs to make ends meet, because it's not easy.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
So I would work most evenings as well. I think the great thing about an agency, and I would recommend it as a place to start, is you work across this like real breadth of clients. So I was working with art fairs like Art Basel, like commercial galleries, non-profits. You get, even like just directly with the artists themselves, collectors, you get this real cross-section of what the art world looks like. And especially as someone starting out, I think it then, you can work out what it is that you're most interested in.
Yeah.
And even if you don't plan on going into art PR for your career, I think it's actually a great way to get that insight.
Yeah. And then you get to obviously also build relationships with journalists and publications.
Yeah. So, I worked with a bunch of different types of places. always the work that I've enjoyed the most was working with nonprofits, institutions. I worked with the Guggenheim Bilbao when I was based in London, which I loved. And just that pace of work and the depth of that work was always much more appealing to me, rather than working with a commercial gallery where you're like, every 6 weeks.
New show.
And they probably have 5 locations.
Yeah.
So it's 5 new shows.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's, it's an interesting challenge. And certainly commercial galleries put on incredible shows, and there's a lot to be said for that. But for me, I like that the ability to just like engage on a deeper level with something. So I think that's like it's a useful way of exploring those different functions within the art world. So after a couple of years in London, Sutton had very recently opened a New York office, and they approached me to come out and kind of be this, continuity between the 2 locations. So I came out to New York, and
What made you say yes to New York?
do you know what? I'd never been to New York before. I'd never even been to America.
Wow. Way to just take the leap.
I was ready for a change. So I thought, why not? If I hate it, I'll come back.
Yeah,
What's the worst that could happen?
exactly.
And I loved it. It was great. I think it's, in terms of the art world, it's so interesting. I think our approach to the arts is so different in London, in the UK, in Europe. We publicly fund our museums.
Yeah.
We have free entry in most places for our museums. So it's a very different attitude, I think. And, because it's more expensive to engage with the arts in the US, it is there's less access. There's it's a different kind of person probably that you're going to encounter.
Yeah.
So I found that really fascinating. And, also when it comes to arts press, your options are just so much more broad in the UK. And I think also in Europe, there are more publications. The broadsheets are much more open to covering the arts. I think it's just seen as more like deeply important to society there.
Yeah.
Rather than an afterthought or something for the elite.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in New York, if you get a public education, the arts funding is getting constantly cut every year.
Yeah.
It's less and less. And then...
I mean, it is in the UK too,
Yeah.
but, that's a function of the government we have right now.
Yeah, and then like here, on every major museum, the board is obviously elite white wealthy people, or, most of the museums opening in the United States now are privately owned. And then become, either public museums or nonprofits and things like that. So it's very different from Europe, where, like you mentioned, a lot of museums are publicly funded. And more accessible to the general public, I feel like, or maybe less intimidating because you're brought up with it as a way of life.
A lot of that funding, and there are also, this is all complicated.
Yeah.
I think there are also some pros to the US system, but a lot of the funding you get in the UK is contingent on hitting certain benchmarks. So like, how are you engaging with your community? How are you bringing in people from different like demographics? How are you bringing in younger people? So you're incentivized to broaden your audience. Whereas in the US, obviously that is not the case. I do think some of the programming that happens in the US could only happen here. I can't imagine DIA existing in London.
I can't
because
no.
Some of our programming it's hard to engage with. It's not for everyone.
Yeah.
It can be like, complicated, and so there are pros and cons to both parts of that system, but it was so striking when I first moved here.
Well, yes. I feel like unless you really work in 2 places, or like you get to experience working in Europe at some point, you don't really get to see that because you're just in this little envelope of New York, and New York has its own little thing going on. But so tell me a little bit more on the technical side for people who might want to be doing something similar about like what your visa situation was like.
I love having the visa conversation.
Yeah,
We're all like
people,
experts.
people love swapping stories. Which visa do you have?
I moved over here originally on an L1, which is an intra-company transfer visa. So Sutton, having, international offices, were able to move a manager level person within the company. So I came over on that. And then when I went to Dia, and Dia, by the way, had been my client at Sutton also, and then I went in-house with them about 6 years ago. I applied for an O1 visa, which is an alien of extraordinary ability, which always makes me laugh.
I love it.
Which offers you a little bit more flexibility, actually. So you only have to renew it. I mean, if you're coming from the UK, every 3 years. If you're coming from other countries, that can change. There are, different timelines for different places. And yeah, it gives you, mine is sponsored by Dia, but actually I can be sponsored by like anyone. I could have applied with like a friend acting as my sponsor, essentially, I think. And yeah, it leads quite well into a green card.
Okay, great. On another note, how was it lifestyle wise to change? Because obviously you've grown up in London and then you were never in New York up until you got this job. How was that for you? Was it like a little bit of a culture shock in the beginning, or were you just like, yes, I love this, let's do it?
Do you know, I kind of loved it. I will say my first apartment I moved to, I didn't have a window in my bedroom. That was a culture shock. And it was also very humid.
Did you move in the summer?
I moved in July.
Oh,
yeah.
My God. Okay.
So I very quickly moved from that place. I think everyone has to land in a really terrible apartment when they first move to New York.
100%.
It's like a rite of passage.
Yeah.
But no, it's funny. There's this kind of unfair stereotype of New Yorkers, I think, that they're unfriendly. And actually, everyone here was so incredibly friendly when I landed here. And, I was like, Americans, they'll like take your number and then they will like call you on the phone. It's wild. And an English person would never do that.
Really?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, maybe I'm just like running into the wrong New Yorkers, or I'm the wrong New Yorker.
Well, you're European. There you go.
Oh, yeah, it's true.
But yeah, it takes some getting used to, but I very quickly like fell in love with living here. I was going to come for 2 years and now it's 8 years later. So
wow. So now I forget if they say that you become a New Yorker after 5 years?
I think it's 10 years.
10 years. Okay.
Yeah,
I wasn't
so I've
sure
got
if
a
it's
little
5
bit more
or 10.
time.
Okay. You have 2 more years and then you're an honorary New Yorker.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I want to ask, after like this entire journey, are there any sort of helpful tips or tricks or advice you would give to somebody who's kind of following in similar footsteps to yours?
Yeah, I think, my main piece of advice would just be to put yourself out there, go to openings, talk to people, make connections, read as much as possible. And not just art magazines, read all sorts of different publications. You never know when a client is going to be like an art forum interview, or maybe they're a Playboy article. There's like so many different ways in for the kind of projects you're going to be working on that, you just want to have a really broad understanding of what that media landscape looks like. I'd say, also lean on your contacts, ask people for advice. Even if you don't know them that well, see if you can like go and take them for a coffee and pick their brain a little bit. In my experience, this is like a very generous community, and people are really happy to like offer advice, offer a helping hand, put you in touch with someone, give you a journalist email, give you advice on how best to like structure something for them. It's, I think we're collaborative more than we are like, self-promotional. So
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and the art world, as I always like to say, New York is such a big city, but the art world is such a small place.
Right. Everyone knows everyone.
Exactly. You will run into somebody, or you know somebody who knows this person. Like it's very small, and people tend to travel like between obviously the same like similar galleries or museums, because obviously there aren't like thousands and thousands of them. So
And we're not in competition.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
I think the attitude that I've always come across is like, what's good for you? Like, it's good for all of us.
yeah.
You know, Magazino is right next to Dear Beacon, and any way that we can work together to get more people into the area, to raise awareness of like how amazing and rich that arts community is. Working together is always better.
Yeah,
So
100%. And we just had this great networking event at DIA with Bloomberg
Yeah.
Connects, because we did the Hudson Valley campaign with them. And I thought that was like incredible, because I got to meet so many like local
that was that
people.
was great. And there were so many people who like hadn't met before. So bringing them all together in that space was just, you know, so amazing.
Yeah, there's so many art
And there are already
institutions.
collaborations that are coming out of that. So.
Exactly. And there's so many art institutions in that general area that people might not even be aware of. Or like, I mean, obviously we do because we work in that region, but you don't necessarily get to meet the people behind those institutions. So it was nice to have that opportunity to get to meet everybody. All right. Well, I think that covers it, unless there's anything else that I'm missing that you want to
I think
share.
that's great.
Okay. So should we do the fire round?
Let's do it.
All right. Pick a number between 1 and 10.
4.
4. Okay. What is your, well, I'm sorry. That's for artists. Let me switch to this. Number 4. What is a passion project you want to complete?
Do you know, we spoke about this before, but I used to play the flute, and in the UK you do like grades. So I did all the way up to grade 8, which is the final grade. I got that one, and then the only step beyond you can do is get your diploma, and I never did it. So one day I've promised myself I'll go back to doing like playing the flute, and I'll get my diploma, and then I get some little like letters behind my name.
Nice. Do you still play it? Like
I still play.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Not in any like serious way. I think I'd have to put a little bit more effort into
Okay.
it. But
Still keeping the dream alive though.
yeah.
Okay, good. All right, pick another one.
1.
1. Name an artist you admire.
Oh my goodness. I mean, there are so many different artists that I could name. when
Maybe
it
give
comes
me
to
like
this,
top
but-
3 so we don't put you on the spot.
I mean, we mentioned her work already, but Delcy Morelos,
Yes.
who's currently showing at Dear Chelsea, I think her work is just incredible. And she really was not getting the recognition that her work deserved. So I'm really excited that she has this platform and to show these really ambitious projects at the moment in New York. So that's been really exciting. Another one of my favorite artists is Sildo Moriles, who's an incredible artist his work was, I think it was an exhibition at the Tate a long time ago. And that was an exhibition that really made me want to work in art. And I remember just walking through it by myself and spending like so much time with the work. And some of his installation pieces are so huge and immersive. And then there's this one piece that you go into this room and you're like, there's nothing here. And there's this tiny little cube of wood that's like in the corner that he sanded down from an enormous wooden block. So it's kind of this like conceptual, almost like performance piece. And you just see the like remnants of it. I have a tattoo of that book.
No way, that's so cool. So he was really an inspiration for you.
Yeah. And then Ragnar Kjartason, who's one of my all-time favorite artists. And again, a piece that I saw in London when I was really young that really made me have this like different kind of appreciation for art. At the Visitors. And if you know the work, it's a multi-channel video piece that has this like sort of almost like chanted song going through it as they like play this music. It's so beautiful. And I saw it. It was installed in a multi-story car park, and I sat there for maybe 3 hours. And
That's
watched
incredible.
it. Yeah.
So art was really like in your life since you were a child, because you said that you've seen these when you were younger.
Yeah, I mean, when I was like a teenager.
Okay, teenager,
Probably,
okay.
yeah. My mum is an artist. So I think, you know, growing up, we always just had like some creativity going on around us. We were always like drawing and painting and making weird little things. So I guess it was just sort of instilled as something important for me from a really young age.
So your mom is an artist and your dad?
He is a journalist.
No wonder
Yeah.
why you're in arts communication. I mean, that
I
just
know,
makes
I'm
perfect
the
sense.
perfect fusion of the two.
Literally. No, that's great. All right, let's do maybe one more or two more.
Okay, let me think. What did I say? 1 and 4?
Yes.
Let's go 7.
7. Okay. This is a hard one. What is something that you think everyone should experience in their lifetime?
I think I'd have to say being like completely off the grid.
Yeah, go for it.
And spending like time there,
Yeah.
being uncomfortable with like, you know, well, or letting go of that uncomfortableness with not having a phone and not having the internet. And it's very rare to be able to find that.
That idea.
And it
also,
almost has to be like forced on you. Well,
Yeah.
you know, the lightning field gives you that for a brief period of time, and that's really special. I mean, I've spent like a week in the jungle with like and it was I was like incredibly anxious for the first like 3 days, and then I was like, you know what?
Incredible. Where'd you go?
Peru.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you visit Machu Picchu also, or just?
We did do that.
Okay.
Yeah, we did our like little touristy bit
Yeah.
as well. But you know, we also went into like the middle of nowhere, and eventually you're just like, you know what? Everything will be fine.
Yeah.
No one needs
Yeah.
me.
No, I 100% agree. I feel like especially for people who live in major cities
Yeah.
like New York, we're so constantly connected at every level, whether it's your
But it
laptop
takes
or TV.
time
Yes.
to get out of that mindset.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's all very well and good doing a night or a weekend.
Yeah.
But really going and spending time is like, you know, it's refreshing.
Yeah, no,
I
100%.
highly recommend it.
There's like these places. Sometimes I go in Poland, and it's just like these cabins in the middle of nowhere, and like I completely disconnect because there's no service. And at first, there's this weird feeling of like needing to have that phone and just like checking my messages. And then like after a few days, it just starts to slowly like dissipate, and then eventually you don't even care that you have a phone at all.
Yeah. Oh, I cried when I
Yeah.
turned it back on.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Like so sad, but so dramatic. But
Yeah.
it felt like, I don't know, kind of a wrench.
Yeah. No, 100%. I completely agree with you.
Especially
I think
when,
everyone
like,
should experience that.
We're like glued to our phones
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah. All right, one more.
All right, 5.
5. What is one thing you're sick of hearing?
Oh my God. In the art world or somewhere else?
Anything that you want to say.
Let me see. I don't know. In the art world probably, but where are my reviews?
Okay. Of course.
Like, I tried.
I know. Working in comms and especially in PR, when you have to like pitch stories and then obviously get reviews or put something in a publication, it's like no matter how many times you talk to a journalist or no matter how close your relationship with them is, sometimes you just can't get that story in there because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And everyone's just like, why couldn't you do it?
And honestly, the media landscape in New York has shrunk so severely, even since I started working here. And that, you know, there aren't a lot of options anymore.
Yeah.
We have to be like incredibly creative.
Yeah. Also, I feel like no one really writes reviews anymore. It's just kind of like a description of the show and then that's it.
Oh God, I know. I like can't stand reading those.
Yeah, I'm like, can we have some critical thinking? Like, is anyone out there left? Like,
But there are like places like Four Columns,
yeah,
write like incredible criticism. Even like the efflux criticism is really fantastic. And those, I would much rather place something in one of those than like
same.
quite honestly like an art forum review where it's, as you say, often just very descriptive.
exactly. No, I completely agree with you. All right. Well, I think I'm not going to badger you with any more questions. So thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you. This was so lovely.
Thank you. And obviously we'll stay in touch. But for my viewers, if anyone wants to get in touch with Hannah or has any questions or wants to connect, please let me know. I'm happy to put you guys in touch. But yeah, until the next episode, and I'll see you guys later. Bye. Thank you for listening.